What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Funnel Vision Show. I am very excited for today's guest because we are talking about a topic that is very, very important today in the world of digital marketing. And that is about privacy, compliance, and how you can, as an agency owner and as a marketer, really help your clients and your businesses grow through this ever-changing landscape of privacy and all that. So my guest today is Mikael Prgin, and he is the founder of a company called Enzuzo. I'm going to let him introduce himself as normal. So Mikael, let's start with your humble brag. Why should people listen to you? What have you been able to do for yourself? What have you been able to do for your clients?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I'm really grateful to be on your program, and I'm excited about your new podcast. And I want to introduce Enzuzo to your audience as we are solving a new problem in a new world where marketers have been used to growing their businesses based on freely available personal data. And that is now changing. The concept of how do you get your customers' data so you can grow your business? The rules of that are changing where all of a sudden now you need to be aware of compliance laws and regulations and how players like Google are enforcing those regulations and making everyone do things a little bit differently. So we are basically helping customers, in particular marketing agencies, grow their businesses in this new world where compliance all of a sudden matters and it's become a barrier to revenue for many people.
Yeah, I have actually just signed up and installed Enzuzo on my website. So now we have it and I understand kind of the back story. And you and I have had a lot of conversations around this topic. So let's take a quick step back. How did you get into this? How did you decide that you wanted to get into the world of compliance? Tell everybody a little bit about your story in terms of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, for sure. I built two companies prior to this, both successful. I sold both of them to public US companies. This is my third company that I started. I had exited my last company and I took a little bit of time off and I started doing kind of research on my next project. I started asking actually a lot of my friends who are CEOs of SaaS companies, mostly based in the KW region. I started asking them, what problems do you have? You feel like you need either a product or the product that's out there is not sufficiently meeting your requirements. And compliance and data privacy became one of the hot topics. GDPR had just come in, and this was back in 2018. And people were feeling like this is an area that's going to become much more prominent. At that time, it was mostly something that was in the enterprise space, and it hadn't hit kind of SMB quite yet and smaller organizations. And so we decided that's how we kind of got into it, mostly from my network. That's where the pain point discovery came from.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember 2018 is when we started Funnelytics and the data privacy stuff was just starting to pick up. GDPR obviously is starting to kind of take over. People were asking us about tracking and what does that look like? And we had to get very compliant, from the early days. But now it's starting to really accelerate. It's starting to accelerate on the consumer side a lot more. Talk to us about what's happening from a Google standpoint in terms of compliance, in terms of data privacy, and why is this so important for marketers to stay on top of?
Yeah, for sure. So I think a lot of marketers will know when you go and try and, let's say, build a new website or a new brand and you want to start growing through digital marketing, whether it's ads, SEO, one of the first things you got to do is you got to put in a tech stack, your CRM, your Google Analytics, and put all that together. I think anyone who's done that understands this is a very complex, just to get that right, to get the tracking and to get the funnel visibility and just to be able to answer what's working, what's not working, what do you double down on, what do you kind of not do again. That's a challenge, and it's challenge finding resources that know how to do that well. Now all of a sudden, Google has come in with new rules called Google Consent Mode, where you can't just get the marketing and the tech stuff right. Now there's a compliance piece. So previously the challenge was, okay, you need someone who understands both marketing, but also web tech stack development and all of that. Now the compliance piece is like a third leg of the stool where you also need to understand that. And that's just the complexity of understanding how all those three things tie in is not easy. And with the rules that Google has implemented, they basically said, okay, if you're going to implement a tech stack to track your funnel, you can only track your funnel on consented data, meaning that the user
Right.
now has to say, I consent to having my data tracked. And if the user doesn't say, it doesn't go into Google Analytics, it doesn't go into Google Ads, it doesn't go all the way into all your funnel visibility tools and analytics tools. And that really changes the game for marketers because now what we found is when marketers implement Google Consent Mode, which right now is the thing that's happening in Europe, they will typically lose somewhere between 30, in some cases, 90% visibility of their traffic. And then, which is massive. So we've had clients So what we do is we come in and we not only help them be compliant to the Google's rules, but we also help get that visibility back. So in one case, we have a case study where an agency got a customer who had lost 90% of their funnel visibility. And using Enzuzo, they were able to recover them back to only a 10% loss. So 90% visibility gain, which was a massive impact for their business. So what we've done with that capability is we've armed agencies with a new source of revenue. So one message I have to a lot of marketing agencies is compliance. You might think about compliance as a cost. It used to be true prior to this year. But with Enzuzo, compliance is a new source of revenue for you because if you can help your clients solve this problem, not just getting them compliant to Google's new rules and all the new regulations, but also giving them the optimal funnel visibility, then people are willing to pay for that because that's revenue enabling. And also for a lot of agencies, the tracking doesn't work. You might have a hard time executing on an ads campaign or an SEO campaign or whatever your source of revenue is, or building out a new website. This is going to start to become a revenue blocker. So not only do you unlock your own revenue, but you also have a new source of revenue. And that's what we're enabling agencies to do.
Yeah, I think it's very important to reemphasize what you just said in terms of what's happening here. So, in short, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but basically at this stage, Google has said, okay, if your website isn't compliant, and it's a little bit more prevalent right now in the EU than it is in the US and Canada. However, if your website isn't compliant, then we will not pull any data back into Google Analytics or back into Google Ads, which means that you will have zero attribution. We probably won't even show your ads at some stage, and you won't have any sort of visibility in your metrics. So you'll spend money on Google Ads if we show them, but you're not going to see what's happening with those. So in Zuzo, basically, you come in, you help people set up the right privacy policy, the right terms of service, and then basically create a little cookie consent banner where now, as a website, I'm compliant. And if somebody hits the allow button, now all of a sudden Google Analytics and Google gets all of that data back and you gain that visibility. And better yet, you've created some tools that make that compliance aspect and that cookie banner, you can kind of split test it. You can run experiments to try to get the consent up so that you have more and more visibility and more tracking data. Is that a pretty fair summary of everything you do?
Yeah, exactly. So, there's kind of like two phases to it. One is you want to get your website compliant, which is just a good thing for all the regulations, gain trust with your users and comply to the new Google rules. But then once you implement compliance, you will lose inevitably, no matter what you do, you will lose some funnel visibility. And then the question is you want to optimize and the reason you lose visibility is because no website is going to have 100% of users that click accept on that cookie banner. Some percentage are going to say, no, I'm not serious. I don't want you to have my data. But where you place the banner, what you put on it, how you organize it, how you brand it, all that tends to have dramatic impact at the percentage of users that accept. And this is what we can help people optimize with analytics and data. We can help optimize. And it's a little bit different for every website. And it's something that needs to be continuously monitored, and that requires the right kind of expertise. So there's kind of two parts to the solution. One is getting compliant, and the other one is optimizing the conversion rates.
Now, tell me a little bit about how it works from a non-identifiable information. So, for example, I mean, typically what we find is with GDPR and all that stuff, as long as the identifiable information is stripped and not there, you can still ultimately track a user ABC, and user ABC went to page A and page B and page C. Is that not the case anymore? Is that what you're basically saying? Is that as of in Google's new policies, the minute somebody says I decline, like that user ABCXYZ just does not exist anymore?
Yeah, really important concept. The IP address of the user is considered PII, personally identifiable information. So if you click, I don't accept, your IP address doesn't go into Google Analytics, doesn't go into Google Ads, doesn't go into all your CRMs, and doesn't propagate. And you need IP address for just everything, right? So what Google does have, if you don't accept, they have basically an anonymized ID. They have your browser signature. They have the time and date. They have the URL that you clicked on. So there's a little bit of data, and they apply a behavioral model using machine learning to look at, okay, a bunch of users like you, what they typically do. They will apply a behavioral model to saying Google Analytics show you what the estimate of that traffic might look like. Problem is that behavioral model only kicks in after a lot of clicks. Like you have to have almost 100,000 users a month for that behavioral model to click in, and for a period of like a month. So a lot of small websites won't even see that. And even the websites that you do, it isn't very transparent. Like you don't know exactly how good it is and all of that. So that's the problem. When you click accept, IP goes through, all the tracking works just like it normally would. But when you click reject, it's a very finite amount of information, which really makes it difficult to track all of the things that you want to track. And so, the first step is really maximizing the people that you get accept from. Which is an exercise in understanding who your users are, regaining their trust, knowing how to communicate to them, and making sure that the compliance piece and the marketing piece are really nicely integrated. That's really important. And then the other part is for the traffic that isn't accepted, where you have minimal information. How do we use that minimal information to help us infer what's going on and also to optimize the consent? That's really kind of what we do.
So tell me where you think this is going in terms of Europe is obviously a little bit more advanced than North America, or further ahead in terms of privacy compliance and stuff. And we know that that's going to come into the United States, and that's going to happen in North America as well. But where is it going? I mean, marketers and businesses need information to create customized experiences. Nobody wants uncustomized experiences. There's not a single human who's like, yeah, don't show me ads that are relevant to me, or don't create an experience that is ultimately catered to me. But on the flip side, every single person is like, yeah, I want to be private. I want to be, I want things hidden. So where do you feel is going to be that balance between those things? Is it strictly this kind of concept of consent, and some people will get customized experiences and others won't? Is it more? I'd love to hear your thoughts on where you feel this is going in the future.
Yes, great question. I think the world of customized experiences will continue to exist, but it will kind of fragment into a whole bunch of, I guess, I don't want to use the word walled garden, but I think every brand will now have the responsibility to get consented data. If you have consented data, you can do all of that customizable. A great example of what not to do is what happened to Facebook between Facebook and Apple, right? So Facebook used to basically buy private data off of, from apps in the App Store. And a couple of years ago, Apple changed rules and said, okay, any app collecting data now has to by default ask for permission. So now the opt-in rate went from something like very high, like 98%, down to like something really small, like 4% or something like that. Because the average person, what's their benefit to passing on that data to the third party? However, the app itself has a little bit of leverage with the customer. They can say, well, hey, so say you're a TikTok And, for me to use TikTok, I have to allow them to use my data. What the regulators are basically doing is they're saying, hey, if you want to use your data to run your app and personalize your app, that's great. But if you want to sell that data to third parties, that's much harder. And there's now opt-out mechanisms like the California do not sell my data opt-out is it's much easier for users to say, okay, I want to use this app and I want to give my data for the purposes of using this app, but I don't want to allow this person to pass that data on to third parties and just, and a lot of the tracking and the marketing ecosystem relied on this sort of freely available third party data. And that's the part that's disappearing. So the concept of first party is that's not going away. That's going to become the most important thing, which is whatever, if you're an app or a website, you're a brand, your most valuable thing that you can do is accumulate first party data from your users and customers, which means you're making the trade off. You're giving something of value to your customer in exchange. They're trusting you with their data. And then all of that customization and all of that works. But you can't just go out and get all kinds of other data without having contracts and agreements, permissions, consent, and all that.
So, a question about this, and then we'll wrap up here. Tools like Apollo and Clay, these massive tools, not Zoom Info, but Seamless, these tools that help create records and populate data on people. Where do they fall into this? Are those going to slowly start becoming banned? What are your thoughts around that? Because technically, I can upload a person's name and start collecting and getting all of this data on them, right?
Yeah. And one thing you'll see is some of those tools will only work in the US. They actually will not work in Europe, not all of them. And the ones that do work in Europe, they'll have a special flag that say, okay, they're not on, but in Europe by default, they'll have a flag that says, okay, turn me on, but you're taking on the responsibility and the liability, right? So typically those tools tend not to be GDPR compliant, but there's loopholes in some jurisdictions they can get around. And as more and more privacy, because we're now seeing, every year there's 4 or 5 states that are passing new, stronger privacy laws. There's discussion of a federal law as well, both in Canada and the US. These loopholes are starting to close and it'll become much more difficult as we go on for these tools to function. A lot of marketers are facing a lot of challenges there because on one hand, outbound is getting really much more difficult because nobody, uses a phone anymore. People don't look at their email and it's just, that's cold outbound is getting harder and harder. And then some of these tools that are trying to solve that problem, make that more efficient, are getting kind of squeezed in by data privacy laws, which is, I think, what's going to become really valuable is building audiences and communities where you do have consent permission. Whether it's you built an audience on LinkedIn or TikTok or Instagram and those people have given you permission to communicate with them and then you're targeting that audience, or whether you build an audience through some kind of a community or people that are just finding you and basically signing up to your service or newsletter and all of that, building an audience from the ground up. That's basically going to be the most important thing going forward.
Yeah, I agree. It is building an audience and owning that data is super important. Anyone listening, if you want to be compliant, enzuzo.com, we'll put that in the show notes, enzuzo.com. We installed it on our website. It is one of the simplest, fastest user interfaces to kind of just get compliant. And if you're an agency, well, it's just a new revenue stream for you to ultimately be able to get your clients to be compliant. They pay you for that. So Mate, thank you so much for being on, sharing this and your expertise. Where can people find out more about you besides just checking out Enzuzo?
Well, you can go to enzuzo.com, enzuzo.com. And for agencies that want to turn compliance into a revenue stream for the agency, email us at roi@enzuzo.com. So roi@enzuzo.com. And we will send you a playbook on how to turn compliance into a revenue stream.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Mate, thank you very much for being on.
Thank you so much.